Hi everyone. So tonight I'm going to be talking about the XHR and Fetch API. The lectures show you a more thorough way. Tonight I'm just going to show you how you can use the XHR and the Fetch API so that you can get ready for your stage 2 of your project. One of the most important things I want you to understand from XHR and Fetch API is that, or not understand, but that I would like you to think about, is that you should use the Fetch API more, as I believe more browsers are capable of using it now. And also, but also you should know how to use XHR because sometimes you will be dealing with code that still uses that, and you need to know how to actually um, fix the code or work with old code. By the way, I didn't even check if you're listening to me. I can see these lines here, so probably you're listening to me, hopefully. Anyway, so when you're working with the XHR or Fetch APIs, I'd recommend you that if you have code that has XHR code, like you will find on stage 2 of your project, uh, you can try and transform it so that it uses the Fetch API. And actually, that's something I did when I submitted my code. But it took me too long. So again, this is because I thought I'm just going to improve the code, and in the end I was I barely made it. Submitted my project. I was like 3 weeks before the really hard deadline. I was able to submit it, but I did it, and I actually thought I'm not going to make it. So, and that's because I wanted to do like I said previously in the previous webinar, or maybe 2 weeks ago. I don't remember exactly. Is because I tried to do everything at the same time. I tried to implement new features. I tried to make the code better, but the problem is that I was not working on the actual problem at hand, which was the solving the problems that the Udacity project stages were asking me to solve. So I'd recommend you to actually work with the code with what you have, and then once you're done implementing those solving those problems, implementing those features, then you can go back and work on your code so that it's better and it uses new features in JavaScript. For example, in this case, the Fetch API. But otherwise, just keep using XHR with the code that you have, and then on stage 3 you will have to implement other features. I'm not going to get into the post right now. I'm just going to be using get, because that's all you have to do for if I remember correctly, for stage 2. All you have to do is make sure you are actually fetching your data from a server that will be provided to you by Udacity. And there is actually a repository. You don't have to worry too much about it right now. Uh, but you can go ahead and download this. You can get a link on your stage 2 uh, on the section from the Udacity lectures, where you can actually access and start working with stage 2. You will get a link to this sales server. It is basically a development server or an API server implemented using a technology called Sales. It's pretty cool. It allows you to create uh, like an API. It's like an MVC framework. So the Udacity team actually implemented the API for the restaurants using these Sales. You could even, get in depth more how to use Sales, how to implement your own stuff, but you don't have to. And again, like I said, if you want to add more features, like I know some students even wanted to add more information or change information to the sales server. For example, some even wanted to allow users to maybe, I don't know, add pictures or change the information on the server. And you can do these using Ajax technologies like XHR and better yet, the Fetch API. Again, so you can actually download this. You have instructions on how to do so. I have mine right now running on the background. All you have to do is once you download this, you simply type a node server.js. You wait a few seconds, even several seconds, depending on how many uh, because actually you actually have to npm install. Forget what I said. You actually have to do npm install, or even uh, yarn if you use that. I don't think it says here. Uh, yeah, npm I is basically npm install. It's a shorthand for that. So basically, you have to install all dependencies before you can start running this server. But once you do, you will be able to have a server running in the background, and it's going to be listening on port 1337. Now, if you want to test using XHR and the Fetch API, you can go ahead and do so. You can open an editor or even do it like in some of the lectures they show you. You could even perhaps open the developer tools. Uh, but right now, I was going to show you something that is Postman. But before I do so, let me give you a short presentation. You can actually use this code, and it'll be all you need for your stage 2. And this is only for GET requests. And by seeing this code, you will see the big difference between an XHR and a Fetch API request. But once we start with the XHR, the most important one, or to get started, it's opening a connection. In order to do that, all we have to do is type XHR open. Then we tell it that it's supposed to be a GET request, and then we pass to it the URL. You could save the URL on a variable. That's also good practice. Perhaps if you're going to be using this on a function or a method that you're going to be calling from elsewhere, you can simply give to that function a parameter that will be giving it the URL. And then with all code, you can pass it callbacks. You're going to be seeing callbacks on your stage 2 project. You can actually even see it now. If you look at your code, you have XHR requests right now. Now, I don't think you had to edit those methods in your stage 1. And if you did because you wanted to change them into the Fetch API, that's fantastic if you already did. If you went the extra mile and even got rid of the callbacks, again, that's something I will talk about maybe once we reach stage 2, when I give you some hints and some tips, actually, on how to submit that stage. I'll show you, but again, this is something I did, and I was really excited because I wanted to, use the new Fetch API and all that. But anyway, for now, let's see how the XHR works and all the code that you actually need to get to get data from an XHR request. So the first you get the XHR, and then after that, you get XHR on load. And I believe I am actually forgetting something here. I just remember that you actually have to do XHR have to define it as a new XHR request. Even as developer, sometimes you get the code, and I can't believe I actually forgot this, but you actually have to. They give you some examples here. Let me see. I'm not. I'm gonna be honest. I prefer the Fetch API, so I'm not really an expert in XHR requests. but you actually have to do this, which is request equals new XML HTTP request. So this code is actually missing something, and that's a good catch, because if I had run this code and I didn't know why I was getting an error, this is pre-formatted by my editor, so I'm gonna have to do some copying and pasting here in order to make it look good. And then you have to actually use this here, new XMHLT request. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So if someone was tuning in right now, perhaps they would be able to tell me, hey, you're forgetting something. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. And this is something that I'm supposed to do actually before all of it. And I forgot to pre-format this. Very important to remember that you actually have to do that. And if I am missing something else, please do let me know. Anyway, so the second thing you have to do is you have to handle the unload. And this is actually code from the lectures and maybe even the stage. You will see something like this in the on the code you're working on. Basically, on unload, you want to handle. If you want to know if everything was a success, the response, you want to ask, if a status is equal to 200, then you can go ahead and do something with that response. Basically, that means we got some data from the server, and we can go ahead and do a JSON parse, because in this case, we're going to be dealing with JSON. So you can go, you get a success response from the server, and then you can go ahead and parse it and save it into the data, and then you do something with that data inside this unload. After that, it is recommended that you actually handle your I should copy this here. Okay. You should handle the error inside this unload, meaning that if the code is not 200, if you got, I don't know, like 404, it wasn't successful, it doesn't exist, or any other kind of code, then you have to handle that. Okay, request fail. Then you can console log. Well, obviously, this is going to be only appearing in the console. Obviously, for a project or a website or an app, you should let the user know otherwise in any other way. But in this case, all we're doing here is just outputting something to the console and saying, okay, the request failed, it returned a status of something, 404, it doesn't exist, or 503, there is a server error or something like that. After that, we should actually handle this. This is something that is not easy to find out. I actually missed this when I was working on my project, and maybe even some developers that haven't used XHR in a while can miss this. I know that many developers actually experience once. They always say that even they forget things sometimes. It's impossible to remember everything. So I'm pretty sure that even some advanced developers forget this, because when the server is running all the time, if the server is at least telling you that it has an error, like the 500 codes, I think, are for any problem with the server. The 300, I'm vague about those, but the thing is that only 200s, it's an okay status, and even in the 200, you're gonna get a response from the server. But if the server is completely down, there is no response, it's completely dead, one of those where it times out, then you're gonna get an error. And if you don't handle that, then you might as well not do anything on your app. Your users will be left waiting for something that will never arrive. And it is here on error where you will actually have to handle those sort of situations. Even when maybe some of your code doesn't work, maybe perhaps there is a bug somewhere in this area in the unload. maybe you thought you were doing something right, but there is a bug, then an error will be thrown. So you need to handle the error as well. So it is not only about when the server is absolutely dead, there is no response, but also about handling errors inside the XHR request. And at the very end, all you have to do now is just let me use add this here. Okay. And this thing is one all the way down. Okay, so all you have left to do is do the XHR send. So on XHR, after you define all the things, all the methods you have to define inside of them, it is then when you can actually do the send. And after that, all of this, the unload and the on error will be taken care of. And this is all the code you need for an XHR request. But now I'm going to show you why I like the Fetch API. Well, maybe not only me, but pretty much a lot of developers. I'm pretty sure they like Fetch API a lot more than XHR, because the code is simpler and easier to read, easier to handle the errors. And but I do believe there are a few scenarios where XHR is still better than the Fetch API. I think it's for certain scenarios where you want to, uh, I don't know, like get some data, or like um, as soon as you get a little bit of the data, like a streaming, I think something like that. I'm not entirely sure, but there are scenarios with where XHR is still better than the Fetch API, because those simply the Fetch API doesn't have those features yet. But for everything else, when fetching data, especially JSON data, or any other kind of data that the Fetch API is able to handle, Fetch API is superior in terms of a smaller amount of code. So when you initialize a fetch, again, you don't need to do a, you know, XHR equals this new. No, you don't have to do that, because basically when you use a fetch, you're getting a promise. Obviously, you're going to be doing something with the data inside that chain of promises. But on the Fetch API, all you have to do is use fetch the data, and you're providing to it a URL. After that, you're going to be handling or rejecting error codes. Now, it is important to do this even before you try to do something with the data, or pass it along to the chain promises, because it is easy, as I said again, it's easy to forget sometimes that just because you get a response from the server doesn't mean it was an okay. So the Fetch API actually provides you with something that is the okay method on the response. So that means that it will handle as long as it is with the codes that mean the response is okay. In one way or another. I believe it is 200 between 200 and 206 or something like that. I don't remember, but anyway, this means that response okay. It means the response was okay. There is no 404 or 503 or 300 and something, or whatever any other code there is. It means the response was okay. No, now we are using a negation here because it means that if it's not okay, then I want you to return a rejected promise stating that the error is that the data couldn't be fetched from the server, one way or the other. After that, we want to parse the data because we know we're going to be using JSON. So we return a response JSON. Now, please notice the return here. Since this is a chain in a promise chain, actually, first we did the fetch, and then this is the next step in the chain. We got back a response, and then with that response, so we can pass it along to the next chain in the promise, we return something. So we either return a rejection because there was something wrong with the server's data. Either it wasn't found, the server has a is an error or it's busy, any kind of code that got back from the server that is not okay, then we reject it. Otherwise, we return the response, but already parsed as JSON. So notice how here you can simply use response JSON. That's another thing that Fetch offers you, that all you have to do is use the JSON method, and it parses the data for you. So the next thing is now we can actually use the data on the next chain of the promise. So once we get to this, then we get the data back. So this parameter here is going to be taking this whatever was returned here, and then we can actually do something with that data. All we're doing here in this code is simply doing a console log data, which means that any data we got back from the server is simply going to output that on the console. If you were to be using something like you were to create elements or do stuff like this or like that, you would actually pass this maybe to another method that will handle all the data for you. But just know that at this point, the data has been already parsed from JSON, so you can actually access it and do something with it. So the final step, it is where you will be handling the error codes and any other kind of error that happen in between. So here we want to be handling two things: either a rejected promise because the data wasn't available, doesn't even exist, the server is down, it's completely dead. That as well, because any error, any rejection is going to be catched by this catch statement at the end of the promise chain, and it's going to be able to handle it. So error at this point either has this value that the data couldn't be fetched from the server, or a thrown error because maybe it was able to get it, but there is a bug somewhere in our code, or something went wrong, something happened. Even an error here in this, when we are trying to do something with the data, if something goes wrong here, it'll be catched by this as well, and we can actually output that error so that it let us know what is wrong. So we can actually, if something happens here, something goes wrong, we'll know, okay, it's because it couldn't fetch it from the server. If something goes wrong here, then JavaScript will give us an error, and it'll be shown on the console. And that's it. This is all you have to do when you are doing a Fetch API. As you can see, the code is very simple and easy to read. You know that you are doing a fetch to that URL. Then with the response, if the response is not okay, then just go ahead and reject it. Otherwise, return a parsed JSON, as in line 3. And then with the data that we got back, do something with that data. Otherwise, if you catch any errors, just console log to the error. So this is the code that you use on a fetch, and this is the code you're going to be using on an XHR request. And another thing it is not easy to notice perhaps with this is that maybe you will want to handle the rejection or the error code when you're trying to get data. So let's say, for example, here you wanted to use something like IndexedDB to get data from the local machine, which is something you will also be learning. And so that means that some of the data you're fetching from the server may be available on user's computer. So you have already some data to access. So that means when you are using an XHR request, it means that if you couldn't get this with a status of 200 here, perhaps you will say, okay, I couldn't fetch the data from the server. So in this else block, you're gonna be doing, okay, let me try and fetch some data from IndexedDB on the local user's computer, and then you handle that here. But that also means that you will have to handle that here on the error as well, because if the server is completely dead, there is no response, then you also have to handle the error there. So you could, of course, enclose all this handling in a method say you create a method elsewhere that say, okay, get IndexedDB data, but even then you will have to have your code in two places, in the else block, so it handles error codes, and on the error code block, because there was an error. So you have to make sure you actually remember to do your code in both places. Whereas in a fetch, all you have to do is handle that, the failure for whatever reason on any error. You will be able to handle that here by simply saying, okay, this failed, so get or try to get data from IndexedDB now. So as you can see, a fetch is more elegant, and that's one of the reasons why I decided when I was working on the project to transform my XHR request into fetch ones. But I was having a bit of a hard time because, as you will see, you also have to use um, callback functions. But it's actually not too hard to use the callbacks even inside a promise. All you have to do is make sure uh, you either create another promise, create a new promise where on success, once everything is successful on the fetch, then you can run at the very end of the chain. You can return the data that is already parsed and pass it to the callback, which, by the way, is synchronous. Or simply, when there is an error, just call the callback with the error itself. It is kind of tricky because fetch is a promise base, is asynchronous, and then all that. But it is, once you understand a little bit of those things, you can actually do it. Or you could even transform those callback functions into promise-based functions, which is something I did as well. But again, like I said, it took me way too long. So just try to learn how XHR works for now. This is how it works, and this is what the data you need for handling errors and handling the data. And if you are able to use XHR and Fetch API correctly, there is not a lot to change on your code. Once you're done with all this, then you can go ahead and do improvements. But my recommendation is just simply, when you're dealing with old code, still use XHR. When you are creating new code, just create your code with using the Fetch API. Okay, so like I was saying, I wanted to show you a Postman. It is actually a tool that many developers use. I actually didn't know about this tool before. Uh, um, Someone introduced it to me. I actually have an old version right now. I still have it as a Chrome app, which I think is no longer being maintained. You actually have to download your OS's version. But right now, I can actually get it to work. I have my sales server running in the background. I know it's working. It's listening on 1337. So all I have to do to get some code, they're showing you here how to get restaurants. This is actually an example of how to do it using the terminal. But Postman actually gets it uh, pre-formatting, and you can actually use it. So all I have to do here is just paste that. So I know that I'm using a get method, and I want to get data from this. And as you can see, as soon as I press enter, or you can click send, you will see the data you're getting back from the sales server. Now, it is important for you to know how the data you're getting back is formatted, because I will let you know now. The data you're getting now on stage 2, I believe it is going to be different from stage 3 as well. So you're going to be getting one server for each stage. And right now you're getting even reviews inside object restaurants. And this is sometimes easy to miss. Fortunately, I did not miss it because I knew a little bit about JSON formatting. But this is actually an array right here. So if you try to access your restaurants as though you have objects and objects and objects, you actually get an array of objects here. So sometimes this is easy to miss, and this is where Postman help, because you see these arrows I'm using here. This is actually telling you you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 restaurants objects inside an array. So once you get your data back from the sales API, you know you have an array of 10 restaurants. So remember, the object you're getting is an array. And then within that array, you're going to get 10 restaurants, where those 10 restaurants, each one will have a reviews object with an array of reviews objects. So this actually helps you understand the formatting a little bit more. And there is also another endpoint where you can actually get restaurants by ID. You're going to be needing this endpoint for getting restaurants for each of the restaurants, because you have a restaurants page. So, well, actually, I need to delete that. It's restaurants, and then you don't need to add these enclosing braces. All you have to do is enter the restaurant ID, and they are giving you number three as an example. So when you do this, the server is going to give you back just an object. There is no an array anymore. And the beautiful thing also about Postman is that you can actually perform tests on other online APIs. So some of them actually ask you for authentication, but you can even sign using this authentication here, and it gives you a pretty good user interface for you to play with the data. I'm sorry, play with the data and see how it looks, and so you can work with it. So I recommend you to get Postman, or otherwise you can simply rely on something like curl, like they're asking telling you on this example right here, curl HTTP, but you will be getting a bunch of tests here on Postman. You're already seeing how it would look once you get back something like a JSON, right? This is basically, if you want to get the name of restaurant, you will access the object where you will be saving it into an object, and then you will get the name and then the photograph, and then you will see a lot of things that you will have to notice by yourself. Like, for example, a quick tip here, some of the data may be completely different. For example, maybe photograph used to be called something else, like maybe photo or picture. Maybe this number here now is photograph number 3. Maybe, who knows, it was 3 JPEG before, with the whole extension. Maybe latitude and longitude wasn't written like that in the previous JSON file you were using. So also try and find those over there. And this is actually how you can do some testing with the fetching from restaurants. And then once you know how the data is working, you can come back and then use either XHR or the Fetch API. Because if you don't know how the data you get from the server is going to be returned, like, you won't be able to do anything with that data, and you will have to do a lot of console log and say, okay, how does it look, or what am I missing? Why am I not getting what I thought I was going to get? So Fetch API, XHR, use whatever necessary. XHR for old code, just keep it like it is. You don't have to worry too much about trying to change it into a fetch. If you create new code, use fetch. And this is the code you need. I'm going to be posting some of this into your Slack so you can have it. Or you know what? If you need it, send me a direct message, and I'll lend you this code so you can actually have something to work on. Beyond that, I cannot help you too much on your stage from the project. But again, if you have any questions, just let me know. And this is for today. And thank you for listening.